this week specifically because this just became part of, I think, 200 new emoticons that we have in our phone. So I'm happy this is the day in which the Italian gesture became part of the world that I'm talking about coming back to Italy. So before we start, I just want to do a quick check in the room and know, well, who of you is actually Italian but never lived abroad?
Never lived abroad.
Never lived abroad. Okay, fantastic. And who of you is not Italian but chose Italy as their home? Okay. And who of you is a returnee, which is Italian, left abroad, and came back? Yay! Fantastic. We have a few. Fantastic. Thank you. So I'm obviously a returnee as well. What I do is I'm a creativity hacker. What that means is that I work at applying creativity to change, and I do that for brands, and I do that for people, and I do that for territories, and I also do that for myself, especially once I've taken probably the biggest decision of my life in 2017, which was leaving a 12 years executive career in a big corporation abroad, and come back home to Italy from California for taking a year off also. This is important to say that I took a year off to come back. So while I was thinking about this talk, I was very excited, also very nervous, because actually I don't feel arrived yet. This is 2020, I've arrived in 2018, and my return is not finished, technically. And so I was like, what am I going to tell people about my return? How am I going to talk about this story if it's not finished yet? So I had this idea of looking at return from a perspective of design. And what that means is looking at return as an interesting problem to solve. And an interesting problem to solve calls for interesting questions to ask. So a month ago, I started this survey among my friends and all the people that I know all around the world, and I asked them, what would be the question that they would ask someone that came back home? And so during the talk today, I distributed this question like white crumbles on the road that will lead us to ultimately what I realized. And what I realized is that the going is just a little bit of the journey, and everything else is return. And how did I get here? So let's start from the first question. Why did you come back? Right? One of the most coveted questions of all times. And everyone knows there are many good reasons to come back to Italy. I know that one of the American favorites reason is this. And I wish it was that simple, but for me actually, I came back because a return was inevitable. And it was inevitable so much so that I found myself intentionally designing a return home. To talk to you about my return, I kind of have to talk to you about my sense of home. Without that, it's kind of difficult to understand, and a sense of home is something that we develop when we're kids, when we're very little, actually, and it determines everything that we do in life. At least that's my experience in determining my life, my career, and my choices. So I come from a very small village in the south called Buonalberto, which means good hotel. Everything's good. I moved to Lake Como in the north when I was 7 years old. And you know what psychologists say is at 7 years old, your character is completely formed. So if you want to do something with your kids, do it before or after. So actually what that caused is like our home was always the small town, and we would spend probably 20 years of my life just going back there 3 times a year. And I did everything there. You know, I learned how to speak, to talk, to dance, to read, to love, and my first kiss, and everything, but I didn't live there. So what my life was a series of farewell, right? So I kind of called myself a farewell expert for a long time, because that's how I understood how to build home. I was building home by separation. Okay, that was my idea of home. I also part of a family that kind of went away from home for the first time. My parents are first generation home leavers. They, you know, before them, my parents and grandparents, they experienced some other kind of loss, loss through war and loss through, modernity and everything, but they never experienced the loss of home. My parents were the first generation to experience that, and me and my brother are the daughter and the son of two narratives. One narrative of empowerment coming from my mom, who's always said, I'm a tree carrying its own roots everywhere. And then one narrative of honor, if you want. Well, my father, they always said, we left home so you could have a future and we would never go back. So it's very important to understand that, as it is very important to understand that my return happened in a specific context. And the context was the passage that I was doing in my life from my first life to my second life. And that determined a lot of how I designed it, right? Because it didn't happen in my 20s, it didn't happen in my 50s, it happened while I was transitioning between these two things. And we've always been told that we have one life, right? While I like to believe that we have many lives, and many beginnings are possible always, independently from your age. But what I was convinced of was that to move from one to another, you had to break up with the first life to move to the second life. I was very convinced of that. You need to let go of your past and you need to move on. But my perspective changed with time. And I actually came up with a theory that I then found in this fantastic book that I recommend to anybody that is interested in exploring this topic. It's a book by a French philosopher, Juliet, called A Second Life. And the tagline is, how do you start existing for real? So what he says is like, there's a first life that we all have that is led by prescription, meaning it's a life in which we know and we do what they taught us. It's led by interest, right? We're interested in being seen, in having a career, and having success. And we capitalize on coincidence. It's a life in which we don't exactly choose everything that happens to us. Sometimes life happens to us and we just go along. And then there's a little space of maneuver, and it's a life in which freedom is achieved by escape. Okay? The second life instead is a life of promotion. There's a little bit more agency, right? Initiative, because you have experience. So for me, this was what I've done now. When I'm 38 now, and my second life started when I was like 35. I'm also convinced that's the reason why Jesus was 33 when he died. Because it's pretty much what happened, right? The second life has a specific age somehow. And you capitalize on experience, you learn to create space, you're led by truth. You don't give a crap about interest anymore, right? Expectations from others, you just want the truth. And then freedom at this point is achieved by liberation. What Francois Julian always says is also that it's possible to have a second life in the continuity of the first one. So you don't necessarily have to break up, right? So this leads to existing, which is a word that comes from Latin and is existere, which means one simple thing: keep yourself out of the conditioning that you had so far and that doesn't serve you anymore. So if this is the definition of existing, I started existing here. This is the 29th of October of 2017. It was the day after I left my job. And I show you this Polaroid, try not to cry. I'm sorry. What I see here is a person with a body, and I see a body without a person. Okay, so I kind of came out of a big burnout from my first life, a little bit, for the simple reason that, like many of us, I basically identified looking for myself in what I did, right? There's a time in my life in which I was completely what my job was, right? And I took this photo here because I wanted to sign an agreement of return with myself. And I wanted to sign an agreement in which I could tell myself, first of all, I don't want to go back here. And second of all, when I talk about returning home, I'm definitely going back to Italy, but what I want to return home to is myself. So this is a memento that I keep and that I want to keep looking at. And also, spoiler alert, coming back home and dealing with your shit is also a fantastic beauty routine. all right? So it works. So I was talking about identifying myself with my job a lot, and because I was a farewell expert, the going in my first life was very important. So on top of the geographies that I already have accumulated with my family, I transformed my career in a series of farewells, as much as I could. Left Italy in 2009, I was angry, I was claustrophobic, I was like, get me out of here, I'm not gonna grow ever in this place. And I moved to New York. I was lucky enough that my company gave me the opportunity to have this fantastic career, a large career, events, fashion weeks, and I was in PR and communication and all the beautiful lives. And I moved to Paris and then lived there for 3 years, and then I moved to California and lived there for 3 years in Orange County. And what happened to my identity was this. So, it's a little schizophrenic, but I also, basically what happened is I completely changed every time I would change place. So not only I was changing where my job was telling me to go, I was changing with the place completely, and I was like, oh my God, I'm so cool, I'm such a chameleon, I'm able to adapt to everything. And then, just like, I studied chameleons, and I actually found out that this is not how a chameleon changes and adapt to its environment. He doesn't do it fast and rapidly. A chameleon changes slowly by shedding bits and pieces of color at a time. What I was really doing, and I had to be very honest with myself, I was being a snake. I was just like changing skin and dropping the skin there and be like, fuck you or what, This was basically everything that I thought I was and that I was. So what happens to you when you completely identify with your job and completely identify with your place? When the job and the place change, crisis, right? So this is me in the midst of the crisis. I transform in this piece of G.I. Jane. I cut my hair, shaved my head, went to the gym 5 times a week. I went to the office and with a knife in my teeth and defending my team. And that's because, my job mission changed, the company values changed. As usual, there's always a management change that happens and everything is in turmoil, and I was responding to that, right? And then I was in California, the only person wearing black in California, by the way. And, I kind of went along, and we don't have time to go through the 2 years that followed, but I completely transformed my life in response to that. And I asked the hard questions of who I was without all of this, right? So except for heavy drugs, I've done everything, therapy, leadership coaching, storytelling coaching, creative courage, crystal bath, astrologers, everything that I could do to actually get to the point in which I decided to drive my car, go to the office, send an email, quit, and buy a ticket home. And the universe kind of started showing me signs that I kind of did the right thing. And there were a lot of signs. I would need another talk to go through all the signs. But I brought you the most fantastic one. I did this, sorry, I forgot a little piece. No. And the little piece being that while I was doing all this crazy stuff, life gave me a little bit of a nudge over the edge, and that was 2016. My mom got cancer. She's fine, by the way. Donald Trump got elected, and my green card got pushed of 2 years. 2 years. And my company was in turmoil, a lot of people fired, and me, G.I. Jane in my day, through all of it. And I also had the fantastic idea of falling in love with an Italian, nevertheless. So I was like, okay, way to go, make things really complicated for myself, and then I obviously quit after all of it. So this is Generous Nethercott, and I brought you this poem that she wrote just by looking at me. This is one of these instant poets that you meet, that they kind of do the work of an astrologer. They look at you and they tell you your destiny. And this is what Jenna told me just by looking at me the month I decided to quit.
It's called Homecoming. There are many tales of voyagers and their longings, of the home that rests on their shoulders like a phantom, whispering in their ears. have our turn to become the ship returning to Ithaca. Now the turn is yours. Your spirit moves more swiftly than your bones and is already awaiting you when at last you cross the threshold. Listen, I cannot promise you it will all be as it was, but I can promise you it will be.
To this day, this gives me chills. She didn't know who I was, and she didn't know where I was in my life, and this is what she came up with. I was like, what? So homecoming, and I cannot promise you it's gonna be as it was, and also thank God. But I can promise you it will be. How amazing is this message, for hope, which I definitely needed back then. So I would start telling all my American friends that I took this decision and I quit and I come back home and I go on a sabbatical, and this was the response. Congratulations, oh my God, awesome. And then I would tell my Italian friends, and this was the response. You crazy? Literally, some of them thought that I was lying. Like some of them was like, no, you have a job and you're keeping it secret, right? No way that you actually chose to come home, that you actually chose to come home without a job, like, are you nuts? This was kind of the first sign that I was going back from a larger life to a very small life. And that I kind of gave me, all right, so how do I gear up for this? Am I ready to go back and face this type of conversations? And I also remember that after living the American dream for so long, that the American dream is basically this: hustle and you will succeed. But inside me there was this strong desire to live life in a different way. More like this: you can succeed without killing yourself, right? And that's a little closer to the Italian dream than it is to the American dream, right? We can ask Jennifer Lopez if she thinks the same. She just decided she's going to move to Italy, so we'll see. Maybe she's thinking the same. So the first question that I asked myself was like, all right, so I'll go home, but how might I keep my international mindset alive when I go home? Because, I'm now so many people in here, I don't want to lose them, and I want to transition from first life to second life without breaking up, So I left, again, with my, nth luggages for the nth time, and I came home, and I gave myself a sort of manifesto, right, that I thought, okay, if I manage to live by this philosophy, I'll survive. And the philosophy was like, okay, new beginnings are going to be possible for me if I return on my life past, if I start seeing its pattern, and if I basically can actively promote freedom, and then liberate the power of initiative, right? As soon and as long as I do this, I'll be fine. So my return became sort of like a responsibility, if you want, towards my growth, and I couldn't escape any longer. I had a ticket and I had to come back, so I did. A friend of mine who did something very similar, moving from LA to Texas, he told me, look, if you're going to go through this experience, do it as a tree would, right? Don't do it as a person. Do it as a tree, which means respecting all the seasons that are going to be part of this journey, right? Do not judge the tree by the winter, and do not fret to get to the next one, right? And I learned very quickly that emotional time and chronological time are completely different, right? I was living a life of chronological time, especially when you work in business, you work in marketing, you work in an office, you have deadlines, those deadlines become part of how you think of yourself as well, right? And emotional time, it doesn't care about deadlines, and it doesn't care about if it's February, if it's Monday, if it's Friday, or if it's the weekend, or So I got rid of all my, oh my God, it's Monday, and thank God it's Friday, thank God, to just enjoy my emotional journey, I found this fantastic idea from Kurt Vonnegut in his wonderful book, I Urge You to Be Happy and Notice When You Are. He says that emotional seasons are not 4, they're actually 6. And this gave me so much relief. And I actually very much agree with this. Before actually going into winter, just like animals, right? Just before going to winter, there's a little bit of closure, which is a word that doesn't exist in Italian, by the way. It's this idea of not cutting your life out, but taking the time to deal with the grief, okay? Because it's a grief, it's a loss. When you lose a country, you lose a person. It's nothing different. It's really nothing different. So you kind of have to go through the grief. And awakening comes before spring. So at some point I was forcing myself, I was like, there's the sun out, I should feel energetic. Why am I not feeling energetic? Well, because I was not in spring yet, you know, I was in the awakening and I should have been patient about it. And then there's you know, summer and fall. So I want to guide you through the seasons that I can see now. Of course, while I was going through them, not so much.
Can I ask, why did the awakening just last forever?
Well, it's your call, really.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's the beauty of emotional time is nobody can decide that for you. So if you want to stay in a constant state of awakening, oh my God, lucky you, by the way. But it's like you really, what I learned is like you kind of call your own time on this. You are the referee, you know, and it's very hard to be the referee when you think that you should do something, right? And I tell you, having a sabbatical in a city like Milan was not easy for this reason, because it's all about business and people, you know, cramming in the metro and people getting upset on the phone once they get out of meeting, and you're there just eating ice cream and you're like, okay, try not to feel that pressure, you know, and that pressure defines a lot of how you're going to go through this. So you need to find your tools to protect yourself from that. And this is how you move along. And another essential part that helped me a lot is self-observation. So to notice while you go through all these seasons will help you move from one season to another, because you keep your attention high, you know. And so I want to, you know, guide you through my seasons, not to tell you that this is how it should be, but just to share my experience with you, because I'm sure some of it will be also yours and some of it will not, and that's the beauty of it. So my closure to winter was all about re-entry, okay? And I chose a question that my writing teacher sent me. What is the difference between leaving a job and leaving a place? First of all, whoa. Crazy question, but all I can say about this is the time, and it was right about January, so it's also coincidentally winter. I was 4 people in my head. I was the executive that moved from job, big money, big reputation, big startup, big social media, to nothing, right? And I was the American that moved to Italy. So I was 4 people. My reaction to this, I transformed re-entry into a job, clearly. You know, that's what I knew how to do. You know, G.I. Jane again, through all of this. So these basically were my projects in my first season. Become a perfect housewife, which I've never been. Creating a nest with my partner. Being in charge of all the little things, you know, like the light bulbs and like buying the furniture and all of this, like, I don't know, kind of like weird stuff I've never done. And then I would teach myself again to enjoy the minuscule things. And I automatically started learning about my culture again through games. Gioco dell'oca, Forza 4, like weird stuff that probably was childhood memory. I started, you know, tracking myself, very important. Like we were saying, you know, can I show myself my change? So I'm taking photos of me, you know, moving from the ghost to a person. Like, am I doing well? Am I doing all right? And that, yeah, exactly, that gives you a lot of power that you thought you lost.
Yes.
Believes that they know who you are. You come back home to people that left you when you were, you know, 28. And there's a lot of things that can go in your head and confuse you. So choose wisely these 8 people. And those were the 8 people, more or less, that throughout the year I had the longest conversations with. They were always there when I would feel down, when I had doubts, or when I need to work through stuff. So it was so intense, especially because, let me tell you, to become a New Yorker took me 1 week, to become an Italian took me 3 months. And I'm Italian. Like, I don't even want to know what happens to foreigners, okay? So it was a job. So to become an Italian citizen again. And this was what I actually kept telling myself, you know, like, thank God I don't have a job because I have work to do. And then this thing happens in which I needed space to be familiar again. And I started looking in Milan for places that reminded me of California. And I would go there and spend like 24 hours just sitting and enjoying that feeling that I had when I was back in the other home, right? So I would go, you know, to city life, which reminded me of the artist culture in front of the LACMA in Los Angeles, and just stay there. Or I would just stay there because in city life, you know what you can do? 2 things. Look at the horizon, which in Milan is impossible to find, and then be anonymous, which is also very impossible to do in Milan. And especially when you come back home and it looks like everybody's looking at you, right? Everybody knows you. So I went there for horizon and anonymity. If you would phone me at any time of the day, I was there on the stairs at City Life. And then, of course, Starbucks. I'm sorry for all the Italians, including myself, but God bless Starbucks. I have to say, for the foreigners, it's like church. All right, and I felt very much like a foreigner. And I am so grateful that they started popping up everywhere. As soon as I came back home, I was like, yes, matcha latte, yes. My blood at that point was half blood and half matcha latte, so I was like really happy that I put up. So language. Okay, so the language struggle is very common. I actually spoke to my friend, Alicia Luke, who is a neuroscientist. She studied the bilingual brain. And she tells me that it's very normal that when you have so many languages in your head, what happens to your brain is that your brain chooses the language that's not your mother tongue for you to be able to take more risks and for you to be able to defer judgment. So my life in English was wonderful. My life in Italian, I have no idea. Like, I literally have no idea, because when you choose a language, you choose a view of the world. Okay? So I was very confused of like, which one should I use, and then could not, complete one sentence in Italian. It was always half English, half Italian, and people thought that I was an asshole, but actually, that was the only thing that I knew how to do. You know, still working through it. And then, you know, witness all these beautiful things, you know, all the American trends that they would come to Italy with no translation, you know, Desperate Housewife of Napoli. I was like, what? Okay. And then, you know, Italian culture kind of fight back. Let's talk about kids and religion and like, and so it was fantastic to witness this cultural clash that was happening in my head and also in my country. Okay, so this was too much noise, obviously. So what I decided to do, I started what turned out to be 500 Days of Silence. So I came out of social media, switched off my Instagram, my Facebook, my LinkedIn, everything. And it was a bliss. Try it, because it transformed my entire existence, because all of a sudden I was doing things for myself and not to show that I've done them, right? And that per se is a very healing process, especially when you need to recompose yourself and being the chameleon. Okay, so just to sum up, first season, identity clash, language, minuscule joy, the job, silence, anonymity, 8 people rule, and a ton of tracking. So moving on, at the end of this season, something interesting happened. I went to the doctor, and I had my, health exam and whatnot, and I checked my heart. And the doctor told me, your heart changed. And I was like, what? So what happened is I had a blocco della branca destra, which is basically the right side of the heart was not pumping as much blood as the left side, which by the way was happening in my life too, My Italian life was not pumping as much blood as my American life, so it I biologically transformed in what was happening to me psychologically, which is quite miraculous, but also gave me a lot of power back. I was like, I have a new heart. Maybe I have a new person. So let's go and awake, I was like, finally, I could enter the awakening phase because that gave me some sort of boost. And I started the season Awakening to Spring, which was all about rewriting. So the question that I chose for this is a very difficult question. A friend from California asked me, returning home can often be viewed as a step backward. How did you design it to be a step forward? You know what's the biggest enemy here? Ego. You know, terrible fight with your ego. I was the one living abroad. You know, I was cool. When I moved to New York, my mother would literally go grocery shopping and be like, okay, I'll have prosciutto, bread, and my daughter is moving to New York. Like, literally, this is how cool I was. Like, people could not stop talking about it, and I could not stop feeling cool, you know? So, who am I without that? Oh no. Let's see if I can build the coolness back. So, to get a little bit more serious, my approach to this was reframing, all right? So I'm like, okay, so let me take an account what I know, what I don't know, and what I knew, and then rewrite it. Trying to build a new history out of what I knew before. And I started with a prejudice inventory. Okay, some of you might take offense in all this, but I had to be honest with myself. What is that I hate about being Italian? Okay, and I had to be very honest, and I hated it. And I mean, these are 5, but believe me, they were way more than 5. You know, like things like Italians do not like to work at things; they just want things. You know, shortcut people. Or Italian campaigns against Italy all the time, especially when you're in Italy. Oh my God, can you please love your own people, man? And then, you know, Italian women are the most anti-feminist women of all. And, you know, Italian identity exists because the only thing in which we unite is complaining. You know, all these things. And, I mean, it's not that I solved all of this, but still very much work in progress. I mean, talking about returns that don't end. But I cannot find a different way to look at it somehow. I had to survive, right? So there's a beautiful thing that James Victor was also a CreativeMornings author and talker that says the things that make you weird as a kid make you great today, but only if you put in the work. So I had to go to the source. I had to go to the source, to the origin of who I was as a kid. What made me happy? Because maybe that would help me connect with my Italianity somehow. And that was always, and always has been, writing. So what I did, and I'm going to cry because 2 of them are in the audience today, I finally took my writing very seriously, and I signed up for writing school. And I went to Olden in Turin, Olden College, I don't know if you know it. And I did a wonderful year of a master course in fiction writing in Italian. So what I was doing is I was training 2 things. Learning to write Italian again. I mean, we have witnesses that my verbs were not that cool at the beginning. And also learn to look at my story and my country in a different way because I was writing about it. So I met these wonderful people, my incredible teacher, Cristiano Cavina, and my wonderful 12 disciples. 2 of them are here, raise your hands. Gabriele and Lisa, yay! They became basically my best ally in this journey. Spiritual ally, writing allies. I mean, to find a community that share the sense of discovery with you is essential when you come home and when you go through this turmoil. I mean, reverse culture shock, it's real. You know, it's a psychological distress. And it's so important to find people that can heal with you and for you, and even when you don't know how to heal, you know. And writing has been that for me. Always, you know, being a farewell expert, of course, I love to write life twice, you know. That's my way of returning. I write for that. But this has been like one of the best things that I could have ever done, and that to this day continues. And then, the big one, I went back to this small town, which in my romantic idea has always been my home, right? Actually, it's always been my only home. I needed to change that. I needed to burst the bubble, and I needed to detach from the idea that this was the only place on earth I could feel at home, right? So I did it in a weird way. I used work to do that, which is weird, but Also very much my character. So what I did is I went there and I started a project, and it's called the Ithaca Project. Of course, we're talking about the Odyssey, so it makes sense. The Ithaca Project, the tagline was Buon albergo non ha paura, Buon albergo is not afraid, which meant it was a community design project in which we did a ton of research to learn from the community what made them happy and what made them, alone. And the purpose of this was to help my town get out of isolation and the population, which is a big, big problem in every borough in Italy and in the south especially. So I worked, with the mayor, with the Association of Entrepreneurs and the town committee and all of that, and I had this wonderful opportunity of spending months just immersed into my own history, which I actually didn't know, because you live when you're a kid and you go back in summer and Christmas, what do you know, or where do you really come from? And I got the opportunity to meet with my people, meet them where they were in their lives, in months of the year in which I've not been back, March, June. Who knows how my time looks like in June, it was all about summer and Christmases, and something transformational happened. So the project didn't go further because, when you start, unfortunately in Italy, there's still a lot of blocks when you do projects in the south, and, bureaucracy and funds and mentality and whatnot. But the point is, this was a project that I used to discover myself again and my people. I don't know if it was a project that they were ready to use to change, it was more personal than it was professional ultimately. But the good thing that happened is I uncovered everything they were and everything I was as a consequence. And there were things that I really didn't like. I didn't like everything that I saw. But the point is, I loved it anyway. And for me, that was incredible. Very empowering, because what's best than, find out everything that's shitty about somebody you love and love them anyway. I finally rebranded my small town for me. And I brought that powerful insight with me for the rest of my life. I finally protected my love for that place. Instead of I challenged it, but by challenging it, I protected it, This led me to even a deeper, search. And I had this wonderful opportunity of spending 1 week with Giacomo Mastrosimini, who was one of the best plant doctors in Italy. I wanted to learn from nature. I was like, okay, if I want to learn about Italy, can I learn about Italian soil? And learn how that's different from any other soil around, in the world. And he taught me he's also a soil restorer, which is the coolest job ever, right? So what he does is that he kind of nurture the soil in a way nature would without interrupting it. And he told me one thing that stuck in my head, and that is our world is completely static, while nature is continuously in motion. Okay, that's what I learned from him by being with him for a week. And that happened to me, to my feelings as well. If I was gonna look for happiness, when I came home as a static thing, I would have never found it, right? Instead, if I would accept that it would move, and I would hate it, and I would love it, and I would hate it, and I would love it just like nature does, then I would be okay again. So another message of hope that I took with me. So writing, redeciding homeland, and learning from nature. And here we go to summer, which was a summer of love. It doesn't mean that, I just run naked in beaches. It was about finding something universal. I think at that point, I wanted to feel part of something bigger. And how can I actually provoke love somehow, if that's even possible? And in my search for weird places in Italy in which I could find myself internationally and myself as an Italian, I found this beautiful place. The question was, why do you look for home? Haha. I think my answer to this was to become home, I guess. I don't know, there's no right or wrong answer. I think that's how I interpret it. So I found the Juliet Club. Do you guys know about it?
Yes.
Yes?
I don't know it.
You don't know it. So the Juliet Club is, I don't know, if you've ever been to Verona, there's the Juliet balcony, right? And you can send love letters to Juliet. Actually, in 2015, I sent a love letter to Juliet. And I found love in 2016, so it works. It's true, like I'm a living proof. So what happens is I didn't know back then that there's an entire club of volunteers that answer these love letters that arrive. She's amazing. So you can go there as a volunteer and be Juliet for one day. So you sit down at your table and you read letters from like American girls or boys and Italian and French and Asian, whatever language you want to write in. And you Juliet for one day and you sit down there and you answer a letter from this, teenager in Ohio in a room who cannot see her boyfriend and she's pissed. And you kind of need to, write something to her. And it's a huge responsibility. It's a huge responsibility. Okay, but the message that I got from here was, no matter the geography, everybody has learned love the same way. Love is outside of you. Every single letter was about a Romeo, something they couldn't have, something they didn't have, And every time we would answer, it would be about love yourself, right? So that was the activism that we were doing back there. And that led me to another type of activism when I moved to Rome, and I got to meet with Giovanna Olivieri in the International House of Women, which is, if you don't know it, you should go. It's a fantastic place where there's all the history of Italian feminism. And I learned about, the violence of it and the power of it. And Giovanna told me something extremely powerful. She said, Italian women have been left out of big cultural shifts for so long that every young Italian woman is a new beginner. Okay, it can begin its life over and over again because we're all rewriting history because we've been out of history for so long. And that for me was like a big wake call on like become social aware of my own womanhood and how was I treating love in my life, as well. And so I took the opportunity also to design a time away with my mother alone, time away which was recovering from cancer, with my father alone, we went to Palermo, with my brother alone, we went to Lanzarote. Sorry Leo, I love to embarrass you. Sorry your life. And this was a fantastic way to rekindle with my loved ones because I basically renewed our vows. Right? So I'm away for 10 years. I come back home twice a year for 2 weeks. And I lost all of his 20s. My father was transitioning to retirement. My mother was coming out of cancer. I wanted to be there for them. So I recommend this at any point of your life to just take your family out of your living room and do something with them elsewhere. It's transformative. You learn about them as adults. You learn about them as people. You learn things about your history I had no idea. And that was per se fantastic. So love, woman, and a family. I'm gonna go fast, I promise. Last season, harvest, right? After you've done all this seeding, it's time to get the crops. And I was like, okay, question, let's check in. Did you ever feel American? Absolutely yes. So I had to check if I was still feeling that way. So I went back to California. And it was a way for me to like do a little bit of the tornasole, no? Right? Do I still feel I belong to this place? Do I still feel the longing? And I took a walk at the beach that I used to go to all the time. And when I was there, I remember walking in the ocean and looking at the horizon and kind of like have this melancholy all the time. Will I ever be happy? Will I ever change? No, I look in the ocean and I was completely fine. I was like, what's this? Like, why I don't feel, very dramatic and I don't feel anyway. And I was like, wow, maybe I am my own home. Maybe I do not depend from any place anymore. And maybe this is what's happening. Great, so I came home and again, poor brother. I basically emptied the entire storage that had my 4 lives in it, right? So 4 lives, a lot of work. But it's just like with a smile on my face, I finally got rid of the chair that I found on the street in New York and like all sort of memorabilia, and I was ready to start fresh. And I had a good and bad feeling at the end of all of this. The bad feeling was, okay, I've done a sabbatical, I've done all the work, I'm ready, ready. And I was like, I am so not. I don't feel arrived. I don't feel this process finished. What the hell is this, right? So I've done all this, and so this is where I come up with this, and I was like, okay, you know what? The going is just a little bit of it. Everything else is return. And you know why? Because the design of return is the constant redesign of staying. Okay? And this doesn't happen only if you come home from America to Italy. It happens every day, everywhere you are, in every instances of your life. Right? So I use this as a metaphor, but literally the message is this one. So I'll leave you with this quote from T.S. Eliot, that we shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all of our explorings will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. Okay? The endless curiosity of doing this work. So what happens? After harvest, guess what came? Closure. And then winter again. And then spring again. And then etc., etc., etc. So was it finished? It wasn't. Was I okay with it? Yes. Very much. Most difficult question, would you do it again? Stefano asked me, one of the writers. 1,000 times yes, right? I would not change any bit of the story, but it was not always easy, okay? Actually never. Very painful, very lonely process. So my dream would be to build this community of RR, recovering returnees. I also created the tagline, here for the will of staying, not for the fear of leaving. And for any of you that want to help me in this adventure, or have questions, or have ideas, this is the email address that you can write to. Please write your stories, write your questions, write what we're not going to be able to talk about today. I'm looking forward to connect, independently from the fact that you're a returnee, but if you have empathy for returnees, because it's a very lonely place and it's a very hard work, and it doesn't only happen when you change country. It happens when you change job, it happens when you change identity, it happens when every time there's this, you want to leave and then come back. So I want to leave you with one question to bring home today. And you, what are you doing to come home? Thank you.